Hello, welcome back everyone to the OIS Retina podcast. This is Firas Rahal as always. I'm a member of the Retina Vitreous Associates here in Los Angeles, from where I'm broadcasting, and also a partner at Excite Ventures out of New York City. And I'm delighted to have as a guest today someone who's more expert in the topic we're going to cover than anyone I know, really, and it is a great interview. And I've talked to her before about this, Dr. Daniela Ferrara, who appears to have an MD and a PhD, which we'll get into shortly. Welcome, Daniela. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Super happy to be here.
Join Doctors Maria Baracol, Praveen Dugal, and Firas Rahal at the upcoming OIS Retina on July 27th in Seattle, where you'll see and meet with leading startup companies, top industry executives, and clinical thought leaders addressing unmet retina needs through novel therapies. Save 30% when you register for both OIS Retina and OIS 13, the original Ophthalmology Innovation Summit, taking place this December 1st and 2nd in San Diego. Register today at OIS.net.
Daniela, usually I like to start by asking the people who are on about their personal history. I personally find it one of the more interesting parts of the conversation is how people came around to be in that part of the career that they're in, that we're interested in now. But the history is always relevant. Why don't you start by telling us some of your personal education and professional background that preceded this?
Sure. Happy I could talk about this for a long time, but I will be brief. So as you mentioned, I'm an ophthalmologist and retinal specialist. I did most of my training actually in Brazil. Between my master's and my PhD, I did a fellowship in medical retina in research in New York, and I fell in love with clinical research in America. So I was practicing for a decade in Brazil back then as ophthalmologist and retinal specialist. I decided to start over in America in doing clinical research full time.
When you were in I saw that you'd done essentially 2 fellowships, both at Meath, Manhattan Eye and Ear. You did one in uveitis with Emmett Cunningham, our friend and one of the founders of OIS, of course, and the great and most famous Larry Yanuzzi. Were those independent fellowships or combined?
Those independent training opportunities, and the first one was an observership. So I feel I don't even deserve the credit for that one. The second one truly changed my trajectory, my career path. When I was in Brazil, I'm very grateful for the decades that I practice, and that experience taking care of patients still grounds me, and it's still my North Star for everything I do in academia or in industry. But having one patient at a time and having patients going blind under my watch, I realized I would never defeat blindness through practice. And that training experience in New York showed me that clinical research was possibly where my work could be mostly impactful. So it was a lot of fun, but a lot of hard work and quite transformative.
Yeah, you're a very humble person, I can tell, and clinical medicine, retina surgery, retina treatments can be very humbling experience. The number of people that we can't save is very frustrating, which is why we love having people like yourself in the position that you're in. Did your residency then in Brazil originally?
That's correct. Yes, medical.
Then you practiced. Were you in private practice in Brazil, practicing retina and ophthalmology at that time?
That's correct. Private practice, but always with an academic role. And throughout my training, that was my intent, to at some extent remain close to academia or to clinical research. I'm a clinical scientist at heart. That's my happy place.
Yeah, and then you came and you took an appointment at Tufts, which is current still back, it looks like 2014. Was that first prior to your industry jobs, or was it industry and an academic position at Tufts simultaneously? How did that evolve?
Sometimes I ask myself, how did that evolve? because again, it was a somewhat unplanned trajectory. My goal was to surround myself with trustworthy mentors and leaders that could pave the way for meaningful clinical research. And moving to the United States, academia was my primary goal. And I appreciate very much my academic affiliation with Tufts. It keeps me, again, grounded and surrounded by patients. It keeps me close to students. It keeps me exposed to different technologies, different lines of research that go beyond what I do in industry now. But the primary goal was to perform or pursue clinical research that would help me defeat blindness. But over time, and talking to mentors and talking to peers that I trust and admire, I started to feel that the translation of my research efforts were taking longer than I wanted. And that's how, again, dear mentors and colleagues pointed me towards a career in industry. And it makes total sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I didn't know that, but I appreciate the perspective. So you were in an academic position doing translational research, but the velocity is a little slower than in industry. Is that what your mentors were saying or what you were observing?
That was my experience for the goals that I had personally, and I still have. I think the clinical research that's done in academia continues to be absolutely necessary. And the collaboration between industry and academia is truly a win-win practice, and we should foster that. So it's not that one is better than the other, but in industry, that's where I found the impact of my work to be mostly accelerated or more tangible.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you ended up joining Genentech, I think around 2016. Is that currently a full-time position for you?
That's a full-time job, yes, but I'm very grateful that Genentech allows me to keep the academic affiliation, and many scientists or clinicians at Genentech Roche continue to pursue some level of engagement with their own fields, or they see patients occasionally, or they teach occasionally.
So do you on one final point on the Tufts, do you go in and attend with the residents and or fellows in their clinics, or how is your interaction there?
That's the beauty of retinal research and AI. I don't have to be physically there.
Right.
But per my agreement to Genentech, I can dedicate a few hours per week for independent research and teaching and reading center activities or retinal imaging exploratory research.
That's great. Okay, good. So we're on to what you're doing at Genentech. Why don't you start by telling me and the viewers, what is your title there? What is your role there? And what does that encompass on a day-to-day or month-to-month basis?
Before I dive into my role, I do want to say it's a lot of fun for clinicians. Industry is a lot of fun for clinicians. There are many roles that a clinical scientist can play, and they're all impactful and relevant in different ways. My role in Genentech has always been, in the last decade, medical director in product development. So in a nutshell, very simplistically, I'm mostly responsible for conduct multidisciplinary clinical research. And I basically design, conduct, and interpret clinical data or clinical research data. And in the first years at Genentech Roche, I was serving as medical director in product development in the hardcore drug development programs. And in the last few years, I've been doing similar role, but in the artificial intelligence of retinal imaging space. But when you think about what I was used to do in academia, it's pretty similar. It's clinical research. So it's design, conduct, and interpretation of data.
When you were doing clinical research at university some years ago, though, AI was still kind of a far off idea. Did you think you were ending up in this space? Was that where your science was going then, or not really?
Not really. And I love your question, because one of my main roles at Tufts, it was back then and continues to be, is actually associated with the so-called reading center. So in essence, we provide interpretation for retinal imaging, most of the cases in clinical trials. And I had the chance to do that for many, many years, and I'm a founding member of the Boston Image Reading Center. So I know by doing the challenges behind the scenes of very well-trained experts to actually perform reliable and reproducible retinal image interpretation. There's definitely so much need to improve retinal imaging interpretation. So that background actually helps me to understand the imaging data interpretation in the context of clinical trials, but actually is a main driver to want me to implement artificial intelligence. Humans definitely need help to do this faster and more reliably and more reproducibly.
Yeah, no, I agree. And and we're going to get into this for sure as we go along in our discussion. It seems a natural fit for sure for reading images that AI will eventually, if not supplant our human ability to do it, make it better or speedier. And I'm going to want you to address that for sure. But you're right. So if you were involved in reading centers, you are the human version of what will now become machine. But before we get into that, start with the basics and tell me, as a simple-minded person, how you would define, just on its broad level, what is AI and what is machine learning to you? Like, how would you explain that to somebody at a cocktail party?
Very simplistically, artificial intelligence is a field of computational science that is focused in developing computational systems that can reproduce human behavior. So machines that can perform tasks that are fundamentally dependent on human intelligence, hence the term. And those machines, they learn from the environment, and they recognize patterns, and then they can make inferences. So very much like a human behaves. Machine learning is a subtype of the artificial intelligence field in which the machines are not specifically programmed to perform a given task. So machine learning enables tools to perform tasks by being exposed to data and by recognizing patterns on that data. And in the machine learning field, that happens through statistical inferences or through algorithms. So the machine recognizes patterns, makes inferences, and then makes predictions or makes decisions. So very much like a human would do. And in a very basic level, artificial intelligence or machine learning, what they can do is automate activities that a human could do. But in a very sophisticated level, then AI and machine learning can make future predictions or inform decisions that humans may not be able to do so without that given information. So it's a whole spectrum of implementation in the field.
Yeah, the decision making I definitely want to come to, because this is the part that we'll get back to, but strikes fear into some of the clinician. I'm a clinician, 80% of my day, but it's obviously, well, it just seems logical that that's going to be the next step for us, is to figure out how to improve our decision making. And you're going to help us talk about this. With regard to AI in a general sense, in our specialty of ophthalmology and retina, it does strike me as a great entry point within medicine because of our reliance on data and our reliance on technology, our reliance on imaging. Is that the case? Does the AI field in general view it that way, or are there other reasons? How do you view, are we a good specialty for this?
100%, absolutely. And that's not me saying. The number of publications and efforts in medicine, but also ophthalmology and specifically in retina, have been increasing exponentially in the last few years. And there are a few reasons why ophthalmology, but again, specifically retina, is such a sweet niche for AI. But one of the main scientific reasons is because most of our clinical thinking, diagnosis or treatment decisions, they are based on digital imaging data. So very much a special foundation for pattern recognition through AI.
Yeah, totally. And so let's get a little more specific on that. What areas in your mind seem well suited within retina for AI and implementation of AI? And again, to the simple clinician, I might think, well, gee, I don't really need help reading an OCT. And I know it's much more nuanced than that. So maybe you can tell us, where are the areas within our specialty that seem to be a good fit for near-term or long-term use of AI?
So first of all, I want to say, as a retina specialist, you have all my sympathy, and I don't think AI-based tools will ever replace a specialist. It's not meant to replace a specialist. It's meant to improve our ability to make informed decisions. But and it will definitely change the profile of day-by-day tasks, but hopefully for the best. So, gosh, where to start? I will dice your question in a few different perspectives. So, to your point, how AI can be used, I think very simplistically, again, if we look into the scientific production and the product development in ophthalmology, but specifically in retina, we can see two types of tools. There's one type of tool that's what we're calling imaging segmentation. So basically those algorithms, they find clinically relevant biomarkers and they measure them. So in essence, they do exactly what you're saying, what a clinician can do if we have enough time and training. So there is a limit to what's feasible, but hypothetically, if we had enough time and training, we could perform. So the segmentations algorithm, truly what they can bring is automation, reliability, reproducibility, make our work faster, better. There's a second type of tools, and those are super exciting, but I think we may not be ready for them yet. I think they will come more down the road, which are the future prediction tools. So those algorithms, they can tell you at baseline a prediction of the future status of an eye. And none of us can do that with such a level of reliability and reproducibility. So that's going to be quite transformative, but that's a much more sophisticated use case. And I think it's going to take longer for us to be comfortable in acting on those outputs. But that's definitely a great potential down the road.
That is a crystal clear explanation, and thank you for breaking it down in those two categories. I'm glad, because it's a segue into what I want to give you a chance to speak on more specifically, are the initiatives you're leading and participating in at Genentech, which are exactly in that category. By the way, as an aside, I saw a program on TV just the other day about how one, I think, private equity firm or a big investment firm is now using AI in this sort of predictability way to do financial advising, stock purchase. And of course, the AI is doing it better than the human, right? Because it's gathering data just like we do in our brain, but it can do it over thousands of data units and instantaneously make its so-called prediction over the stock price, which is sort of to what you're speaking about with how will an eye do. So let's talk about that. You've done papers, your group, on the predictability of outcomes in wet AMD with Lucentis, Roche's own product. Tell us about that data. You've published data. I'm sure there's more that's not published. What can you share with us about those results and what it means going forward?
Thank you for asking. We've been super productive, and we appreciate very much the chance to share our results and also to learn from the community. So I feel super important that we all share best practices and learnings as a means to accelerate AI, especially AI in healthcare, especially AI in ophthalmology. So as you described, again, in a nutshell, in our group at Genentech, we have a pipeline of algorithms. The disease areas of interest are exactly aligned with the disease areas of interest in our pharma pipeline. So our tools are focused in diabetic eye disease, so DR with or without diabetic macular edema, and age-related macular degeneration, so neovascular AMD, or geographic atrophy, dry AMD. That's the overall context. Ultimately, the goal of our research is to improve the patient journey, improve patient outcomes every step of the way. So when we think about the patient journey in a clinical trial, from patient identification, disease characterization, clinical trial design, potentially clinical trial conduct, all the way to clinical trial analysis. And in the future, we then want to have potentially those tools also made available at the point of care to improve the patient journey also at the point of care. So in a nutshell, you mentioned some publications around neovascular age-related macular degeneration. Most of our developments are focused on the disease itself. So there's so much potential to learn about physiopathological mechanisms, future targets, again, disease characterization. I think it's time for the retina field to move away from the one-size-fits-all approach of anti-VEGFs towards more personalized treatment decisions. AI can be a bridge to that future. And we do have some algorithms, like you said, that are focused on specific therapies, but I'm super excited also about those that are focused on the natural history of disease, because we just can't treat all patients. The healthcare system is completely overwhelmed. So we have to have better ways to identify patients that need help and as soon as they need, versus the patients that will be fine and don't need to be burdened by unnecessary procedures or monitoring.
That's ultimately, the goal here, and what will absolutely advance the field. I have no doubt that that's going to take place when we talk about, and I want to get back to the GA one, but because that's so relevant right now, they all are relevant right now. When you talk about individualized prognostication, and I think that is what we're looking for, not one size fits all, not you're wet so you get an injection, you're dry so you don't get an injection. That's a little too simplistic, although that is to some extent what we're doing. Does AI then incorporate which of the following, if not all? Analysis of that patient's personal history through a retrospective look at their vision and OCT scanning, et cetera, so on and so forth, and or some other demographic information on the patient and or some other biomarker that can be compared to a larger set. All of these things, and what else? So how does it do this?
Ideally, all of these things, but our line of research, and there are many independent groups worldwide looking at those exact scientific questions you raised. Most of us start from the images and from basic demographics. But exactly like you described, that's what AI is so good about, is to make sense of large and complex data sets. So in some of our publications in neovascular AMD, we correlated the predictive value of imaging biomarkers, but also the predictive value of clinical biomarkers such as visual acuity, treatment history. In geographic atrophy, on the other hand, we're mostly focused on the imaging biomarkers. So it all goes back to the science and to the scientific hypothesis. Again, AI is just a tool, but it must be anchored, very powerful tool, but must be anchored in robust, very clear scientific questions. AI is not an oracle that's going to give us all the answers we want at once, unfortunately.
Too bad. That would be great. And I'm sure there are some doctors in our field who think they may be an oracle, but most of us are not. Most of us are not. Let's go back to the GA, because you published reports on GA. It's so timely. There's going to be a lot of questions for all of us. I'm starting to incorporate Apellis's great new drug into my practice. I've been using it. I'm still evolving, as most clinicians do in the beginning of a therapy, what I view as the perfect candidate, never mind who, but when to start the therapy on that patient. This is where your AI analysis of GA lesions, both in aggregate and in an individual can be very useful. What did you see in this paper? What were you testing for, and what were the results, if you could share that with us? And how do you think it'll apply to our use of these new drugs?
I'll break down your questions again because I could talk about this all day. I'm super excited about the geographic atrophy work. I think it's one of the most challenging clinical decisions, as you described, but it's also one of the most challenging diseases in our space for drug development, and mostly because the natural history is so heterogeneous. And we clinicians cannot predict at baseline with enough confidence what's going to be the status of that eye in the future. So the decision of how to design a clinical trial, whether or not to enroll a given patient in a clinical trial, as much as the decision whether or not to treat a given eye and when, all of those could be potentially informed by AI. And again, with those two kinds of tools, we can use simple algorithms that can, at a minimum, measure the area of GA and help us talk to the patients and make informed decisions together based on that information in front of us. It's almost having a reading center in our pocket. But we can also use the more sophisticated predictions to try to anticipate the natural history. Like you're saying, use data from a very large number of patients to predict what would be the future status of that patient in front of us. That's truly the vision of what we call personalized healthcare.
Yeah, it's definitely the panacea when we get there, which, before I get into another topic that I want to definitely hear from you about, which is drug development itself and the use of AI, I want to move to that. But a final question on this process whereby a clinician can utilize this information on a day-to-day basis in real time to aid in decision making. It doesn't seem we're there yet. When would we see, or are we already seeing it without most of us noticing it, that kind of real time in the clinic? I'm going to utilize AI to help me make decisions on this individual patient. What's the time course?
Hard to predict, but it's happening. So good news is it is happening. We can talk more about what we're doing in clinical trials, but in clinical practice, there are many companies globally that are starting to pursue regulatory approval for their tools. We have 2 FDA-approved AI-based tools in ophthalmology, in retina. They are both for diagnosis of referable diabetic retinopathy, but there are others coming for additional outcomes in diabetic retinopathy. There are tools, AI-based tools coming for neovascular AMD. And I do foresee, we all hope for a future that our practice will be, again, more reliable, and we'll have the chance to make better informed decisions. There's also space for AI to help our day by day that, like you're describing, we may not even notice. For example, device companies are using AI to help improve the quality of their images. And there's a lot of effort behind the scenes that we may not even be very aware of. There are companies using AI to help us understand electronic medical records, or to do management of pharmacy resources. So definitely AI, the healthcare system at large is one of the last segments of economy to fully adopt the technology, but there is potential to help us improve every step of the way in clinical practice and clinical research.
Yeah, it wouldn't be the first time that we in healthcare are the last to the efficiency party. So I'm glad you brought that up. We're often one of the later entrants. What about the clinical trials? You mentioned it, and we do. My group here in LA, we do a ton of clinical trials. We're known for it, and we've done a lot of your trials from Roche. We're in some right now. How is AI impacting that now in a direct way, as you were referring to?
It is happening, and it's quite transformative. Before I share the excitement, let me just pause for a moment and acknowledge we have to get better at drug development. There is extensive publicly available data showing, for example, for one compound to be developed from bench to bedside, this is more than a decade. It's 15 years sometimes. And the success rate of a molecule or drug development is in the single digits. It's, depending on some sources, is less than 4% of molecules that make from the lab to the hands of patients and physicians. And it's up to $2.5 billion based on publicly available information to develop, again, one compound. So the cost is, again, related to the lengthy timelines, is related to the low success rate. We have to do this better. Patients can't go blind while we spend a decade trying to decide if one molecule works or not. So that's the starting point of the excitement I want to share. Again, if we look at the key milestones in drug development, let's use the patient journey as our backbone. When you think about patient selection, cohort characterization, inclusion-exclusion criteria, stratification factors, the whole key elements of trial design, AI can help us do each one of those better, more reliably, or faster. When you think about clinical trial conduct, AI can help us in different ways. It can help us with basic tasks such as site initiation, training, patient education, or it can help us, again, with data management or even treatment decisions in the future throughout the trial. Where we are acting right now is happening as we speak, is using AI in data analysis. So we started from the end because we understand that's the safest environment to test this new technology. And we started from a point in the clinical trial that patients have been conducted per gold standard. And now we're starting to explore at the end the value, all the potential benefits of this technology. So for example, we're using an AI-based retinal OCT segmentation algorithms to evaluate the results from our clinical trials from Vabysmo. And we're super excited about the results and about the learnings about Vabysmo efficacy and overall results. None of that would be possible to be performed by a human. So again, when we're looking into retinal imaging biomarkers on OCT, it's just not possible for human graders to evaluate the amount of fluid and other exploratory biomarkers. So super exciting learnings that then we can apply back to new trials and new further drug development.
It seems so necessary, and totally agree, both as a clinician and a clinical trialist and an investor in venture, the 10 to 15 year timeline is brutal, and most notably to the patients who are waiting. So full agreement, this needs to be improved. What about the other aspect of drug development? You made an allusion to it. I've heard about it from some other companies also, which is, I don't know the phrase, but molecule or target sort of acceleration. So getting to your A1 molecule in a less binary way, in this sort of faster way. How does that work? And is that happening right now?
It's happening right now, yes. And, you know, I think my hands-on experience is very much focused in what my group is doing right now. So it's late stage clinical trials, but across Genentech and Roche, we have other analytics groups that are either focusing more exploratory retinal imaging analysis to be then reapplied in phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials. And we have, as you're describing, analytics groups that are looking to preclinical benefits for advanced analytics and AI as well. Definitely much needed. When we look into the field and we look into the ongoing efforts at large, there is some very optimistic projections that claim AI could reduce, especially in the early stages, the development times from 5 years to a year or two. To be seen. I hope those optimistic predictions are right, but time will tell.
I believe it. What do I know? I'm not technologically that savvy, but it seems to me the speed at which AI is processing information compared to humans in standard laboratory type work or standard clinical trial type work, it seems like improving the timeline by 80% seems realistic. I think it could be even better. I don't know. I don't think it's overly optimistic. I think it's going to really transform how we do all of this.
I hope you're right. And it's always the two sides of the same coin, is doing the same activities faster, but also increasing our confidence. It's at the end is all about making more informed decisions. Because again, if we can act on the lower success rates that we see across the field at large, that on itself, progressing the right molecules to the right targets, that on itself to the right patients will be truly impactful. It's all about informed decisions.
Thank you. I totally agree. With regard to the company and your interest, Genentech's interest in this space, are you collectively doing all the work in-house to bring along these analytics programs, or are you interested, for some of our viewers, in startups who may have interesting technology or idea? Are you guys partnering, or how are you bringing this along?
Absolutely. I think in any ambitious scientific endeavor, partnerships are crucial, because as we're describing, they accelerate the development, they help any given product or tool to be safer, to be more effective. Partnerships are also relevant to the field at large, because when you bring different stakeholders in the same goal, then you increase transparency, we hold each other accountable to the highest standards, to the highest ethics. So definitely partnerships are beneficial in product development at large, and especially in such a new field. And definitely partnerships can help implementation and adoption of those tools. This is high level sentiment. Now, very concretely, we rely on partnerships. We're developing digital solutions in a pharma company, and there's so many independent groups worldwide with similar scientific objectives. And partnerships, they can come in different flavors. It can be as simple as engaging colleagues like us from the community, from academic centers, to as advisors or as investigators, as we do in clinical research for drug development. Or it can be, like you're describing, partnerships among companies. So either way, it's definitely it's part of our strategy.
Collaborative. Perfect. Before we finish, a couple of things. I want to hear your take on what's coming, the future, as we've been sort of talking about. Where do you see AI in the near term, and then maybe the longer term, like 10 years in the clinics or in the OR or whatever? And also something very important to you, I know, is where I've heard, and I know of some discussions about this, where AI can actually play a role in helping bridge the gap in some of our inequities in healthcare and healthcare delivery, including clinical trials. Where do you see those more broader and more specific things?
Well, thank you for the question. I'm going to start from the hard scientific question, and then I'll leave the best for last. So I think, as we've been discussing, AI potentially can improve patient outcomes and improve decision-making for clinical experts, whether patients and clinicians are in the clinical trial setting or whether they are in the clinical practice setting. And I think the two waves of benefits, it's what we've been discussing here. Some tools will bring efficiency, reliability, they will automate repetitive or challenging tasks. Other tools will be more transformative. They will help us make future predictions that we would not be able to make with the currently available technology. But I think we as a field we are ready, and we are already utilizing the first type of tools, the retinal imaging segmentation tools. And then as we become more comfortable with the technology and patient safety and patient benefits starts to be more evident, then I think as a field, we'll move towards the more sophisticated or the future prediction based tools. As we're discussing, I think AI can impact positively patient journey all along the way. And we're seeing this happening already, again, in clinical research or in clinical practice. Now to your second question, you're right. It's so close to my heart. I do want to say, I think I'll make a comment first overall. I think proper representation is a must and is a gap in clinical research and specifically in clinical trials. We know there is not proper representation among our patients in clinical trials. There's not proper representation among our investigators or physicians at large. And personally, I'm super grateful for the chance to pay forward. So in my personal time, I volunteer in activities with the American Society of Retina Specialists, American Academy of Ophthalmology, the Brazilian Retina in Vitro Society, the Retina World Congress. So I'm a member or a chair in many of those volunteering opportunities to improve representation of women in retina and improve representation of Latinos and Black specialists or Black students across clinical trial enterprise, if you will. I'm super grateful that Genentech as a company is also committed to close the health equity gap. I'll give you concrete examples. Genentech just closed an important collaboration with the American Diabetic Association, and we're looking into health equity gap in eye care and how we can intervene, how we can improve that. As a medical director, myself and many of my colleagues, we volunteer in teaching programs with AAO. There is to help underrepresented students to be more active in the ophthalmology field and ideally also in clinical research. So this, I think all of us can play a role in making science better or making our society better at large, not only because it's the right thing to do, but it's the best thing to do. It's the way to improve innovation, to improve science, and move forward as a field and as a society at large. Talking about AI now, and I think that was your original question. Sorry, I just can't help. It's my Brazilian blood.
Your excitement and passion about this is incredible. It's really enjoyable to watch you get excited about it. That's how people need to be if they're going to solve problems. Good for you.
Thank you. Yeah, very, very close to my heart. When we think about AI, and again, we need to think and talk about this very seriously. AI can be part of the problem, or AI can be part of the solution. So we spent the last hour discussing that artificial intelligence is just a very powerful way to look for patterns. And if we train our tools with biased data, we will perpetuate the bias and we will increase the bias and will make things worse. So scientific representation, demographic representation, proper training of those tools and proper utilization of those tools, proper training of those that will use the algorithms and will act on the algorithms. All of that is needed to make AI part of the solution. Because the moment we acknowledge the problem and we act on the problem, then we can actually use those new technologies to address underrepresentation and to address bias and to make all of us better, again, better clinicians, but also a better community and better society at large. So I think if I could summarize, my answer has two sides. One is what you said, it's all of us being passionate and committed and engaged. And then there's another very fun side, which is hardcore science and making sure those algorithms are transparent and trustworthy and properly used. It was a long answer.
No, it's the right answer. And it's really, it was an impassioned answer. And I'm glad you did it. And honestly, I'd never considered or heard anyone else speak to the idea that you just brought about, a warning, which is if we put biased information in, we're going to perpetuate an exponential form of the biased information coming out. That's a great warning. We should all be aware of this as we move forward with the electronic age and artificial intelligence. I'm going to leave it there. That's a great summary of this. And we love that you came and brought all this excitement. I've learned a lot just listening to you, Daniela Ferrara, Dr. Daniela Ferrara. Thank you so much for coming on and explaining all this.
My pleasure. Thank you again. Super fun to talk to you as always. And thank you again for the interest in our work and our commitments. Thank you.